Promises are a new feature in JavaScript as of ES6. But that means they're really useful to have them introduced as part of the language, right? Well, you're absolutely right. Promises are everywhere. And in this video, I'm going to show you what they are, how they work, and hopefully you'll understand why we should all be jumping for joy that we have them instead of callbacks. Now, in order to understand promises, let's define it. A promise is an object that may produce a single value sometime in the future, either a result value or a reason that it's not resolved or rejected. A promise may be in one of three possible states: fulfilled, rejected, or pending. Let's figure out what that means in this video so that by the end of it, that is all going to make sense to you. Now, in order to fully grasp the concept, we must first talk about what we had before promises, and that is callbacks. Something like this. When something is done, execute this piece of code. Callbacks in JavaScript are exactly that. I text my friend Bob and say, "Hey Bob, what's that really good song by the Backstreet Boys?" When Bob has time, he calls me back and says, "Oh yeah, that song, it's I Want It That Way." And that's exactly what's happening here too. We have an element that we're adding an event listener to, and when a user clicks, we're going to have the callback submit form. That is, once the user clicks, we're going to answer with submit form. Let's think of another example. Let's say we're creating a game, and we have this move player function that has the distance to move the player and the direction. Well, if I wanted to move player 100 to the left, I'd run that. Once that is done, I wanted to run a callback function, which is to move player 400 to the left again, and then another callback function right after that is done to move player 10 to the right, and another callback function to move player 330 to the left. And we have something called the pyramid of doom. This is obviously a simple example, but with callbacks, you'll get this nested function, and you create this pyramid of really, really complicated code of this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And it's really, really hard to read. Let me show you a more realistic example. Let's say we had some sort of an app that uses Twitter. And let me make this bigger so you can see. We have a grab tweets function that the first parameter has the URL. For now, I just simplified it. We just passed Twitter and the Twitter handle, and then the callback function after you grab the tweets, which has an error and the tweets. And if there's an error, we throw an error, so that just creates an error in JavaScript. Otherwise, we're going to display the tweets. But then if Andrei's tweets were successful, then we also want to grab the tweets again. Let's do Elon Musk this time. And again, if error, we're going to throw error. Otherwise, we're going to display his tweets. And if that's successful, then we're also going to grab Vitalik Buterin's tweets. And again, if error, throw error. Otherwise, display tweets. And that doesn't look very pretty, does it? I mean, we have to do the same thing. We have to check for error at each time. We have it nested. And just overall, we have a lot of repetition of code. Now, promises serve the same purpose as callbacks. So why do we have two things? Well, promises are new in ES6, and they're a little bit more powerful. Let me show you what a promise looks like. You remember this move player code? Well, this with a promise would look something like this. Doesn't that look much, much better? But it's really hard to grasp what's happening here without really knowing how to create a promise. So let's start with that. I'm going to remove this and create our very first promise. We'll say const promise equals, and this is a new syntax that you'll just have to get used to, new promise. So we're creating a new promise. And this promise has a parameter that either resolves or rejects. And in here, in this function, we have the option to, let's just say, either resolve, and let's just do stuff worked, or reject. And in this case, we have an error, it broke. Now, we obviously want to have a conditional statement here. We'll say if condition. In our case, we'll just let it be true for now. If true, so this is if the promise returned, we're going to resolve it. Otherwise, we're going to reject. And here's the thing, this looks confusing without actually knowing the application, but I want you to just have this over here so you can take a look at it as we progress through this video. This is going to make more and more sense. So now that we have a promise, if I put this into my console, my Chrome browser, all right, I have the promise now, but how can we get this promise to run now? Well, I can just do promise.then. So again, once the promise is resolved or rejected, .then, I want to get the results, and then we want to console.log the result. That's it. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to copy this, paste it on here. Stuff worked. All right, so we ran the promise, it ran this part, and because we've just made if equals to true, this is going to run the resolve, and the resolve is going to send stuff worked into the result, and we're going to console log stuff worked. And you also see over here that the promise is resolved. Again, if I just log promise here, I see that we have the promise with stuffed worked. Awesome. Okay, so based on what we know now, let's just take a look at what we can do with promises. Let's say that now with stuffed worked, I want to grab the result and add an exclamation mark to it. And then, and this is called chaining in promises. Then, after I do that, it's going to return the result with the exclamation mark. And in our case, I just want to get the result 2, and we will just console.log result 2. All right, well, let's see what happens now. So I have my promise. Just make sure that we have it here. Perfect. And we're going to run the promise. Stuff worked with the exclamation mark. Very cool. But what happens if something happens in between here? We just have a console log, but let's say we have an error, and that error causes us to throw an error. Well, what happens now? With promises, you can actually do something called .catch. And this will catch any error that the promise may have. In our case, we just want to console.log. And now, if I run this, we console log the error. Let's just make this a little bit cleaner so that you can see exactly what is happening. There we go. So again, copy and paste. There you go. We get the error. If the throw error happens before, let's say it happens above, and we want to return this. Well, if I move the throw error at the top over here, save, and again, copy and paste. Let's clean this up a bit and see that we still get the error. So .catch catches any errors that may happen between the chains .net, which is very, very cool. All right, so I have a little question for you. What happens if we do something along this line. Let me just go back to what we had before. We don't have an error anymore. But this time, we have result2 plus the question mark. So we're going to add a question mark to that. We're going to return that. We're going